While Fate Stay Night is absolutely full of great fight scenes, few in my opinion really reach as far into the territory of best fights in anime as the battle between Shiro and Gilgamesh in Ufotable's Unlimited Blade Works adaptation. Something I realized recently, however, is just how important it is to specify that I mean the Ufotable version of this fight, and not the DEEN movie adaptation instead. I'm going to go ahead and compare these scenes so you can understand what I mean. The fight starts here when Shiro stops Gilgamesh from attacking Tozuka as she goes to save Shinji. Question? Why does Gilgamesh throw the sword when his noble phantasm is supposed to do that for him? Also, why is it in an upward arc and not a straight one? After this, we're given a bit in the Ufotable version that flat out doesn't exist in DEEN's, this being the explanation of why it's so urgent to destroy the Grail. Evidently, if left unchecked, the new Grail will fill not just Fuyuki, but potentially the entire world with more of that fiery blood that destroyed the city at the end of Fate Zero. This is important stuff, which makes it really confusing that they didn't even briefly explain this in the movie. Instead, in the movie, Shiro bats away the swords fired at him in potentially the dumbest way ever, and makes the Gate of Babylon seem totally pointless. Gilgamesh then, again, throws a sword for no reason to break Shiro's sword and launch him back. The next beat in the fight, present in both the movie and show, is Shiro attempting to use projection to fight the Gate of Babylon. The problem here is that his projection takes too long to match the other swords. After this, in the show, the Grail tries to take Gilgamesh as a core, which forces him to repel it with Ea. This incapacitates and brings forth the idea of using Unlimited Blade Works to Shiro. It also sets up Ea for later. In the movie, I don't know, it just sort of occurs to him. Like, oh yeah, there's the thing I can do. The Grail doesn't try to take Gilgamesh here either. Saber then jumps in to save Shiro in a sword attack that I will admit looks more sensible in the movie than in the show. In the movie, it's very clear the attack is going to deal with the swords flying at him, but in the anime, we never see or hear the collisions. Why does Saber turn her back here? I mean, it makes sense in the anime because Gilgamesh undoes the gates and then steps down to the ground, but in the movie, not only was he already grounded, and therefore an even more immediate threat, the gate stayed open during the entire conversation. An important detail here is that Shiro uses an entirely different chant for his Unlimited Blade Works in the movie as opposed to the anime. The reason I say this is because the chant isn't just some mandatory thing that Shiro and Archer do for any specific reason, and the Unlimited Blade Works they produce are also not the same. Shiro's chant accepts his future and brings forth an understanding of Shiro's life and body similar to how he conceptualizes swords. It's also entirely in Japanese. Archer's is, as opposed to this, a bitter one spoken mostly in a language that isn't even his own. Anyhoodle, after a row IS from an off-screen Archer saves Shiro from oncoming swords, the reality marble comes forth, and immediately there is absolutely no reason why Gilgamesh would just charge in for the melee at the start of this battle. Gilgamesh is very clearly an Archer-class servant. He fights much better at long range. While he may have had some strength by even just being a heroic spirit, he doesn't have nearly the level of bolstered might that Saber, Lancer, or even Archer have. As shown in his close-range duel in both the movie and anime versions of the fight, either Shiro is just as strong naturally or is able to use Tozuka's mana to compensate, which makes the idea of Gilgamesh going so hard into close combat ridiculous. Speaking of Tozuka's mana, if the crest faded away halfway through the fight, how did Shiro keep going? The Ufotable version handles both of these problems in a much more sensible way. For starters, when Gilgamesh begins the fight in the anime, he starts where he has the advantage: long range. He then proceeds to desperately try to keep Shiro at bay so he doesn't have to lose his tactical advantage, which then lets us see exactly why Shiro even bothered to use Unlimited Blade Works to begin with. That being that it counters the Gate of Babylon and evens the playing field against Gilgamesh. In the movie version, we don't get context for that, and basically all it does for Shiro is provide him with swords to draw at a moment's notice. That in and of itself isn't useless, but with how quickly Shiro can project in this version, it'd be far less straining of his mana and just as convenient to materialize blades whenever his break. Unlimited Blade Works is not just some cool effect, it's an incredibly powerful tool, both symbolically and as a weapon against fighters like Gilgamesh. While on the topic of symbolism, there's something very missing about how this movie handles UBW as a symbol. While it's certainly not as depressing as Archer's cloudy, geared sky version, does Shiro's UBW look particularly hopeful to you? Does this scream out hero? I think one of the best scenes in all of Fate was when, in the anime, Shiro accepted his path and both literally and figuratively changed his life. This is beautifully reflected by the skies of the reality marble changing from Archer's dull and dreary version to Shiro's blue skies and moving clouds. After a bit of fighting that looks way better in the show, Shiro then does one of two things. In the movie, he projects Caliburn off-screen and pummels Gilgamesh with it. In the show, he barely survives the swords flying at him by throwing up a row IS. In my opinion, IS as a trump card works infinitely better than Caliburn. Even in spite of Gilgamesh not being a close-ranged fighter, the use of one specific weapon over Gilgamesh's throws away the strategy in this fight of countering the swords with copies. For another thing, Caliburn as a plot device in the 2006 version may have made sense because of how close Shiro and Saber got, but here it just feels random and unwarranted. Rho Ias, a symbol of Shiro and Archer's connection, makes sense being in this scene. Next up, we get the final shot of the fight, where, in both versions, Shiro chops off Gilgamesh's arm to stop him from using Aya and then stabs him. Or at least tries to, more on that in a minute. This shot is passable in the movie if lacking, but it's visually breathtaking in the anime. Quick note, both these fights are well animated in their own ways, but it's very hard to beat Ufotable. In the anime, Shiro runs out of mana here and then loses the crest he received from Tosuga, as opposed to it happening 2 minutes earlier. As soon as this happens, he loses the reality marble and collapses to the ground. Gilgamesh is about to finish him off when suddenly the Grail tries once again to swallow him whole. Unprepared this time, Gilgamesh barely manages to chain himself to Shiro for a desperate escape. Before he can do so, however, Archer uses the last of his energy to fire a shot at Gilgamesh and finish him off. I will give the movie credit in that Gilgamesh's death is way more satisfying and climactic in that version. The key difference in how this happens in both versions is that in the movie, brace yourself, this happens in the middle of the fight! Also, thanks, Archer, for your considerate waiting for Shiro to not actually step to the right before you fired. Look, if I haven't made my point here already, I'm going to ask a couple of questions before we're done. What do you think sounds more like acting? Screaming angrily until the fight is over, or emoting differently under varying levels of stress? What sounds more like an epic battle to you? 2 guys wailing at each other with swords, or a legitimately interesting match of tactics between a king who claims he owns all the world and an ideologue who built his entire life from copying? I'll let you decide that for yourself. Just gonna throw up a couple of comments I found in some videos because A, they're relevant, and B, I love how the second guy calls Gilgamesh Giggles. Not even gonna say anything, that's just funny. I got plenty more content like this in mind if this is well received. That said, good night all. Hope you enjoyed.